It's now a fact that the best mirrorless cameras are the top cameras, period. Almost all major manufacturers are investing their resources in their mirrorless lines. Photographers seeking the fastest burst speeds, the highest resolutions, or the most accurate autofocus will choose a mirrorless camera. Not all mirrorless cameras are ultra expensive professional models. The ranges from Sony, Canon, Nikon, Fujifilm, Panasonic, and OM System provide excellent choices for beginners and enthusiasts, as well as high-end options. There are also plenty of budget-friendly mirrorless cameras available, so in this video, we have compiled a list and reviewed the top 15 best mirrorless cameras you can buy in 2025. For more information on the products, we have included links in the description box below. Let's get started. Number 15, Fujifilm X-T5. I'm a big fan of Fuji's mirrorless cameras, and the X-T5 has some of the company's best features so far. With its 40 megapixel X-Trans sensor capable of producing excellent image quality, in-body image stabilization, a fast X processor 4 with quad CPU that is capable of pushing up 6K video, F-Log Gamma for extended dynamic range when shooting video, long battery life, an insanely fast and accurate autofocus system, and a bright 3.69 million dot EVF, the Fuji X-T3 is an impressive stills and video camera. It even shoots 15 FPS, 20 FPS if you don't mind a 1.3x crop, making it a good camera for sports and wildlife too. While it is an exceptionally good camera in many ways, it is still an APS-C sensor camera, so it doesn't do as well at high ISOs or shallow depth of field as the other cameras on this list. It's also more expensive than most APS-C cameras at $1,700. Check price and availability. You may want to consider the prior generation X-T4 too, which I've seen go on sale now that the X-T5 is out. Number 14, Fujifilm X-H2S. If you want speed in a crop sensor camera, the Fuji X-H2S is for you. It has a stacked 26 megapixel sensor, which has plenty of resolution for most situations. And it's fast. Thanks to the camera's stacked BSI sensor, it can shoot raw photos at 40 FPS. At that frame rate, your buffer is still a very reasonable 140 images. Drop the burst down to 15 FPS and you'll get a 1000 image buffer. So to say that this camera is good for fast action is an understatement. The X-H2S also has some very impressive video features with excellent quality footage. Not only with 4K 120, but also with 6K 30p. Between this camera and the X-T5 above, I consider the X-T5 more versatile because of its higher resolution sensor, but the X-H2S isn't far behind. Number 13, Nikon Z7 II. If you want a high-resolution camera that's excellent for landscape photography, you should look closely at the 45 megapixel, $3,000 Nikon Z7 II. Even though the Nikon Z7 II isn't as fast as some other mirrorless cameras, including Nikon's own Z9, it would be one of my top few choices on the market for landscape photography. An unsung feature of the Nikon Z7 II is the base ISO of 64, giving it a dynamic range that rivals even medium format. Not to mention that the Z lenses are some of the sharpest lenses of all time, making it an ideal system to capture a lot of detail without weighing very much. When the Nikon Z7 II was released, it got some bad press for the autofocus system's wildlife photography capabilities. Of course, it's all relative. I found that even the previous generation Z7 was perfectly good for fast wildlife once you get the hang of it. But it's true that you'd be better served with something like the Canon EOS R5, Sony A7R V, or Nikon Z9 if wildlife photography is a priority for you. Number 12, Sony A9 III. In 2025, we put the Sony A9 III as their 10. However, times have changed, and the Sony A9 III presents entirely new possibilities with its global shutter. This single innovation completely eliminates rolling shutter and allows flash photography to work at all shutter speeds without high-speed sync. Due to its new shutter technology, it has an incredible 180,000 minimum shutter speed and can shoot at 120 FPS. It seems very unlikely that anything in the normal world will be too fast for this camera. I'm putting it a little lower on this list because other cameras, including from Sony itself, are less expensive than the A9 III at $6,000, and these other cameras are just as good for most applications. Still, if you're aching to use a global shutter, there's no other camera on this list but the Sony A9 III. Number 11, Fuji GFX 50S II. Pretty much everything that I said about the GFX 100S above also applies to its little brother, the GFX 50S II. The two cameras share the same design, both have IBIS, and both match each other in most specifications. However, most specifications is not all specifications. The GFX 50S II has a 50 megapixel sensor rather than a 100 megapixel sensor, and it has a slower contrast detect autofocus system. The GFX 50S II is also limited to 1080p video for some reason, while the GFX 100S shoots 4K. Will these differences matter to the typical medium format shooter? Most of them probably won't. I doubt you're buying a camera like this for video or for sports photography. The biggest relevant difference is the sensor resolution, and 50 megapixels is already plenty for most applications. Considering that the GFX 50S II costs $4,000, it's a pretty stellar deal for medium format. Number 10, Fuji GFX 100S. One of the most specialized mirrorless cameras today is the Fuji GFX 100S. It's not a sports or wildlife photography camera at all. Instead, it's a 100 megapixel medium format beast for landscape photography, architecture, product photography, or other high resolution needs. It's probably the best camera on this list. For non-moving subjects, it even has a sensor shift mode to quadruple the resolution to 400 megapixels. My main landscape cameras for years have been the Fuji GFX cameras, and I love them. The lenses, image quality, and dynamic range are amazing, and once you go to medium format, you won't go back. But because of how specialized this camera is, I don't think it makes sense to rank the GFX 100S above some of the more practical cameras on this list. I give a lot of credit to Fuji for releasing the GFX 100S at a reasonable price for medium format of $6,000. That puts the camera within line of the Nikon Z9 and Sony A1. Even though the GFX 100S is a much slower paced camera, it has the best sensor of the three. Number 9, Panasonic S5 II. One area where Panasonic had been lagging behind the best mirrorless cameras from Nikon, Canon, and Sony was autofocus performance, at least in Panasonic's full-frame cameras. The Panasonic S5 II fixes this by introducing the company's Phase Detect AF. Although the S5 II has a 24 megapixel sensor, don't let that fool you if you're a landscape photographer. Like some of the Sony and Fuji cameras on this list, the Panasonic S5 II has a high-resolution pixel shift mode that quadruples a photo's resolution to 96 megapixels. This only works if the subject is staying still, but I found that it produces fairly natural results in previous Panasonic mirrorless cameras, like the Panasonic S1R, see our review. The Panasonic S5 II also has some very good video features, capturing up to 6K video internally. It even has a dedicated cooling fan to allow the camera to keep filming for long stretches without overheating. Add that to the 200 image RAW buffer, the 30 FPS shooting, and the $2,000 price, and you have a very versatile mirrorless camera indeed. Number 8, Canon EOS R6 II. Alongside the Sony A7 IV, one of the best mirrorless cameras today in terms of features is the Canon EOS R6 II. This camera is a replacement for the prior generation EOS R6 that also remains an excellent choice. The EOS R6 II has a 24 megapixel sensor compared to 20 megapixels on the original R6, which is on the lower end of the scale these days, but it more than makes up for it in other features. Specifically, the EOS R6 II shoots up to 40 FPS. Stills, 20 FPS for the R6, has dual memory card slots, and uses Canon's superb new dual-pixel mirrorless autofocus system. It does all this at a starting price of $2,500. Check here for price and availability. Likewise, the prior generation EOS R6 is going on sale for cheap prices these days, $2,000 if you find a good deal. The EOS R6 and EOS R6 II are better than I would have expected in autofocus performance. They are practically as good as the Nikon Z9, Sony A1, and other top cameras in this respect, which was a big surprise when I tested the EOS R6. Well done to Canon for putting such a good autofocus system on a less expensive camera. That said, if you're mainly interested in landscape or studio photography and don't need so many action photography features, you'd probably happier with one of the other cameras on this list. Number 7, Sony A7 IV. I'm stunned that we're already at number 6, and I haven't gotten to talk about the Sony A7 IV yet, one of the best all-around mirrorless cameras that you can get today, and a great deal too. This $2,500 camera, check price, has a 33 megapixel sensor, which is a sweet spot for both landscape and wildlife photography. Although it maxes out at a more standard 10 FPS, the A7 IV has an unlimited buffer and borrows its autofocus system from the Sony A1, so it's great for wildlife photography too. Sony has the advantage of being in the full-frame mirrorless market longer than Nikon or Canon, and it's starting to show now that we're on the 4th generation of the A7. For example, the large lens lineup for Sony mirrorless cameras, including third-party autofocus lenses, gives you more choices than Canon or Nikon, even though those two companies are catching up. One of the best under-the-radar features of the Sony A7 IV is that it has the redesigned menu system found on Sony's newest cameras, including the A1 and A7R V. Frankly, Sony's old menu was a pain to use, even once you got used to it. The new menu makes the camera much more usable. Number 6. Canon EOS R3. If you want a more specialized camera for sports and wildlife photography, it's hard to beat the Canon EOS R3. Unlike the previous cameras on this list, the EOS R3 doesn't have a 40 plus megapixel sensor. Instead, it's only 24 megapixels. But the EOS R3 can shoot 30 FPS bursts with a 420 shot buffer, and more if you shoot at a lower FPS burst. It also has Canon's unique eye-sensing autofocus that begins focusing at the spot you look at in the composition. It's a seriously cool feature. I wouldn't recommend the EOS R3 for landscape photography as my first choice, considering that it costs $6,000 and has a lower resolution sensor. But for any fast-paced genre of photography, you'll want to take a long look at the EOS R3. If you don't need the high-res sensors of the Nikon Z9, Sony A1, Sony A7R V, or Canon EOS R5, it equals or beats all of them in performance and gives you smaller, more manageable files. Number 5. Canon EOS R5. It feels criminal to rank the Canon EOS R5 outside of the top 3, but that's just a testament to how fast camera companies are innovating today. The EOS R5 is a high-resolution, high-speed beast that's equally capable of landscape photography and sports dart wildlife. In that sense, it's pretty similar to the 3 cameras above. The Canon EOS R5 has a 45 megapixel sensor and can shoot a whopping 20 FPS. It has an excellent autofocus system, and like the 3 cameras above, it can also shoot 8K video. Canon found a way to push a ton of data through the EOS R5's imaging pipeline, and it makes this camera excellent for both action photography and landscapes. As you would expect, all this comes at a high price. The EOS R5 costs as much as the Sony A7R V at $3,900 body only. Check current price though, because at least the R5 sometimes goes on sale. Between the two, the A7R V is arguably the better camera both for landscapes, due to more resolution and lens selection, and wildlife, due to the bigger buffer and AI-driven autofocus system. But the Canon EOS R5 is no slouch and easily one of the best mirrorless cameras available today. Number 4. Sony A7R V. Almost reaching the lofty heights of the Sony A1, yet a couple $1,000s less expensive, is the Sony A7R V. It sells for $3,900, check price, and has an even higher resolution 61 megapixel sensor. The A7R V still manages to shoot at 10 FPS despite the high-res sensor, and it has a huge buffer of 583 images, and the autofocus system is incredible. It uses Sony's newest artificial intelligence, subject recognition algorithms. Cutting through the buzzwords, this means the A7R V can recognize subjects like birds and people even when they face away from the camera or have an unusual pose. For a lot of photographers who are considering the Nikon Z9 or Sony A1, the A7R V will actually make more sense. It's an excellent camera for landscape photography because of the high-res sensor, and at 10 FPS, it's still great for photographing wildlife too. It doesn't quite reach the maximum specifications of either the Z9 or A1, but for most applications, it will do just as well as either of those cameras. Number 3. Nikon Z8. The Nikon Z8 can do almost everything that the Nikon Z9 can, not to mention in a much smaller package that costs $1,500 less than the Z9. The only downside to the Nikon Z8 is that its smaller body means that it overheats a bit more easily when shooting higher resolution video, especially 8K. However, for most people, this overheating won't be a problem at all. In fact, I recommend the Nikon Z8 over the Z9 for most people who don't need the built-in vertical grip or who want something lighter than the Z9. Like the Z9, the Nikon Z8 does not have a mechanical shutter. Instead, it's stacked sensor and the electronic only. Shutter is fast enough for any purpose. It also has an amazing autofocus system and access to Nikon's unique array of wildlife lenses. For wildlife photographers, the Z8 is my first recommendation. Number 2, Sony A1. The Sony A1 has extraordinary specifications, basically on par with the Nikon Z9. It can shoot 50 megapixel images at 30 frames per second, which is out of this world. It has an amazing autofocus system too, making for great sports and action photography, alongside the obvious landscape photography applications. Between the Sony A1 and the Nikon Z9, it was very hard to pick which one deserved to be ranked higher. A lot of it comes down to whether you prefer the large form factor of a camera with a built-in grip like the Z9 or the portability of the Sony A1. That said, the Sony A1 is a seriously expensive camera at $6,500 check price. Compared to the Nikon Z9, both cameras have strengths and weaknesses that could favor either camera, and because of that, I gave the number 1 place to the one that's $1,000 less expensive. You can see the full differences in the article Nikon Z9 versus Sony A1. If the price and size differences don't matter to you, it will be one tough choice indeed. Also, props to Sony for releasing the A1 almost a year before the Nikon Z9 started shipping. Sony really set the trend on this one. Number 1, Nikon Z9. The Nikon Z9 is a workhorse no matter what subject you throw at it. This camera is Nikon's best wildlife photography camera and Nikon's best landscape photography camera. It has a 45 megapixel sensor, yet shoots 20 FPS, bursts with a practically unlimited buffer, 1,000 plus shots. And even though it's expensive at $5,500, it's at least $1,000 less than I had expected and stands as one of the best values in a mirrorless camera today. Check current price. Compared to DSLRs like the Nikon D6, the Z9 is more advanced in almost every way, yet less expensive. It sets a new standard in the mirrorless world, and that's why I put it at number 1 on this list. The only downside for some photographers is that the Z9's large size and weight make it impractical for long hikes or full days of traveling. And of course, $5,500 is still expensive. If you're on a budget, it would make sense to get a less expensive camera and put your money toward lenses instead. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up, leaving a comment, and subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell icon so you never miss out on our latest videos.